I was halfway through installing a new motion sensor in my front yard when I heard the unmistakable hiss splat of something hitting my siding. I turned, and that's when I saw it bright orange paint dripping down the corner of my freshly power-washed house. Another shot whizzed past my ear and exploded against my garage door. "What the hell?" I shouted, ducking behind my truck. Across the street, there she was, Margelyn Parker, head of the Oak Crest HOA, standing in her driveway in full tennis gear, but holding what looked like a military-grade paintball gun. She pumped it like she was in a war zone, aimed again, and fired straight at my mailbox. "You were warned, Nathan Calloway," she yelled like a lunatic. "No unauthorized lighting fixtures. You're violating community standards. You're insane," I shouted back, still crouched by the truck. My neighbor, old Mr. Delaney, peeked out from behind his blinds and immediately ducked back down like he was in a hostage situation. I couldn't blame him. It looked like a paintball apocalypse had hit my front lawn. I bolted toward the front door, dodging 2 more shots. One splattered right on the welcome mat my daughter picked out last week. That was the last straw. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and grabbed my phone. "Operator," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I'd like to report an active vandalism in progress. The HOA president is shooting paintballs at my house." There was a pause. "Could you repeat that, sir?" "Yeah, you heard me right." By the time the cops arrived, 2 squad cars, lights flashing. Margelyn had switched tactics. She was now pacing the street, waving a laminated HOA bylaws packet, trying to explain to the officers that I was defacing the neighborhood character with my motion sensor. "This is a Class B visual obstruction, clearly stated in subsection 4, page 12 of the HOA guidelines," she insisted, tapping her paper like it was the Constitution. The officer looked at her, unimpressed. "Ma'am, are you aware that discharging a paintball gun at someone's home is a criminal offense?" she scoffed. "It's non-lethal, ma'am," he said, opening his notebook. "That's felony vandalism." The look on her face dropped faster than the value of her fake pearls. "I'm the HOA president," she barked. "I have authority." "Not anymore, you don't," I muttered from my porch, still wiping orange paint off my mailbox. The officer turned to me. "You have video," I nodded and pointed toward the security camera mounted above my garage. "Full HD." "Caught the whole thing." Margelyn's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. Nothing came out, just a weird little wheeze. One of the officers cuffed her right there in the street, and I swear, 3 other neighbors came outside pretending to check the mail just to watch her get stuffed into the back of the cruiser. "You'll regret this," she yelled as the door slammed shut. I waved. "Already don't." By the time Margelyn was driven away, her tennis skirt still streaked with orange splatter from her own ricochet shots. The neighborhood had fully emerged from its hiding spots. People leaned on their fences, stood on porches, or hovered by their hedges, watching the last of the squad cars disappear down the street. I lowered the garage door slowly, the whine of the motor sounding louder than usual in the awkward silence. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes. Not judgmental, curious, maybe even relieved. I wasn't the only one who'd had run-ins with her. The next morning, I found a folded note taped to my front door. No signature, just, "About damn time someone stood up to her. A neighbor." I didn't recognize the handwriting, but it didn't matter. The tide had shifted. By noon, I had my ladder out, inspecting the siding for damage. That's when Paul Linwood from 2 houses down strolled up with a travel mug in hand. "She ever shoot at you before?" I asked, not looking down. "She didn't need to," Paul said, his voice low. "She fined me over $700 last year because my wife planted tulips that weren't approved species." I climbed down and wiped my hands. "You pay it," eventually, after she threatened to put a lien on the house. He glanced toward her property like it might lunge at him. She always had some new rule, and the board just nodded along like wind-up ducks. That made my ears perk. "The board? You mean the other HOA members?" he nodded. "Well, they're not really official. She kind of appointed them." That was the first red flag I'd heard that morning, and it wouldn't be the last. I spent the next 2 days gathering statements. Not because I wanted to build a case at first, but because people kept approaching me, unprompted, relieved that someone had finally forced a crack in her armor. Sandra, the retired nurse across from me, said Margelyn once tried to get her dog removed for excessive tail wagging near property lines. A couple down the block, the Ripleys, had their driveway repaved last summer and were slapped with a $400 citation because the concrete shade wasn't aesthetically harmonious. But the real kicker came from a guy I barely knew, Marcus, who lived near the cul-de-sac. He worked nights, so we rarely crossed paths, but he caught me outside on my lunch break, holding a manila folder like it was radioactive. "I didn't know who else to show this to," he said, handing it over. "She serves our block too. Last year I started questioning the monthly dues. They'd gone up 3 times in 6 months. I asked for a breakdown of how the money was being spent." I opened the folder. Inside were scanned copies of emails, payment receipts, and a spreadsheet. At first glance, it looked like HOA business as usual until I saw the vendor names. "Gold Pines Landscaping," I said aloud. "Didn't they close down 2 years ago?" "Exactly. And look here, maintenance consultation fees, same amount every month." But I called the listed number. "It goes to her husband's voicemail." I stared at the page. "You're saying she's funneling HOA dues into shell accounts?" "She's laundering it, man, and no one's been watching." I didn't say anything right away. My jaw tightened. This wasn't about motion sensors or flowers anymore. This was organized fraud. That night, I called an old friend, Lee, who worked in the district attorney's office. We hadn't talked much since college, but she picked up on the second ring. "Let me get this straight," she said once I'd laid it out. "You've got forged vendor accounts, unapproved board appointments, and a community fund with no oversight, plus video evidence of her attacking my property. You're sitting on a gold mine of felony charges. Wire fraud, embezzlement, criminal mischief, maybe even racketeering if the pattern holds across enough homes." I sucked in a breath. "How do we move forward?" "You don't. Not directly. You build a file. Every document, every statement time-stamped, verified, then bring it to our office, quietly. Don't tip her off." By the end of the week, I had a binder thicker than a phone book. I also had backup. Paul brought in a USB stick with archived newsletters. Turns out, the HOA used to post monthly expenditures like clockwork. Then 3 years ago, the report stopped. No explanation. Just vanished. Sandra unearthed an old recording of a board meeting where Margelyn shut down a vote mid-session because someone questioned her authority. "Unproductive dissent," she called it. More neighbors came forward, each with receipts, fines, or threats. The fake citations alone could fill a filing cabinet. I compiled everything and drove it down to Lee's office on Wednesday afternoon. She flipped through the binder, whistling low under her breath. "This is more comprehensive than half the cases we get from investigators," she said. "You understand, this is going to get ugly. I'm counting on it." 2 days later, a forensic accountant from the DA's office showed up in Oak Crest. Not in a squad car, just a plain sedan and a clipboard. He knocked on doors, took notes, asked quiet questions. By the following Monday, the subpoenas started landing. First came the freeze on the HOA's bank account. Then a court order to suspend all enforcement actions until a full audit could be completed. The final blow came when Margelyn, out on bail from the paintball incident, was served a warrant for financial misconduct. She was arrested again, this time in front of a gardening club she co-founded. Her face turned the color of wet clay as 2 plainclothes detectives led her away. I watched from the public sidewalk with about 15 other neighbors. No one said a word. We didn't need to. The investigation widened. The so-called board members were interviewed, and most of them cracked under pressure. Turns out, Margelyn had been threatening to fine or ostracize them if they didn't play along. One of them, a college kid who lived with his parents, confessed that he'd signed off on expense reports without reading them. The HOA was suspended by the city pending a vote to dissolve or restructure. The city council held a special session, and I was asked to speak. I kept it simple. Homeowners associations are supposed to protect communities, not fleece them. We let one person turn it into a private fiefdom. That ends here. The council voted unanimously to appoint an interim oversight committee. I wasn't planning to be on it. But the next morning, a petition showed up on my doorstep signed by over 2/3 of the neighborhood. They wanted me to lead it. I didn't say yes. Not right away. But I did show up to the first meeting with a fresh legal pad and a cup of strong coffee. This time, the clipboard stayed in my hand. 2 weeks after the second arrest, the atmosphere in Oak Crest had shifted from cautious optimism to quiet anticipation. With the Interim Oversight Committee now meeting twice a week in the old community hall, I found myself buried in paperwork, learning more than I ever wanted to about procurement codes, deed restrictions, and municipal compliance forms. But what really caught my attention came late one Tuesday evening when I opened a folder labeled Contract Archives MISC. Inside were dozens of scanned agreements, many with incomplete signatures or handwritten amendments that looked suspiciously recent. One contract in particular stood out, a 5-year maintenance deal with a company called Silver Ridge Property Solutions. The rate, triple the market average. The signature? M. Parker. Again, I flagged it and brought it up with Lee the next morning. This company's not listed anywhere in the state's business registry, I said, holding the printout. No license, no tax ID, nothing. Lee leaned back in her chair. That's a ghost vendor. She was probably issuing checks to a shell account. What's worse, I said, flipping to the next page, there are withdrawal receipts showing large cash transfers the same day those checks cleared. She narrowed her eyes and tapped the desk. That's structured embezzlement. If she's pulling cash out in chunks, she's trying to stay under CTR thresholds. That's federal territory. By Friday, a federal investigator from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network had been looped in. This was no longer just a local scandal. The neighborhood HOA had become the hub of a federal probe into wire fraud, tax evasion, and falsified business activity. The committee met that Saturday in the community hall, a squat brick building that used to host bingo nights before Margelyn converted it into her personal governance chamber. We sat around a makeshift U-shaped table assembled from borrowed folding desks. I opened with the latest findings. Silver Ridge Property Solutions doesn't exist, I said, but the payments made to them do, over $70,000 over the past 2 years. Sandra, sitting across from me, clutched her cardigan tighter. Where'd it go? Into a secondary account, I said, linked to a P.O. box downtown. Registered under a fake name. Paul shook his head. Were we just her piggy bank? No, I said. We were her laundering machine. The room fell into a heavy silence until one of the newer members, a retired postal inspector named Gerald, spoke up. We need to go through every single transaction. Line by line. If there's more of this, we'll find it. 3 hours later, we uncovered another anomaly, a payment for community security monitoring totaling $15,000 per year. The vendor, a tech firm that had gone bankrupt 4 years ago. I called Lee again. She's building a fake expense list, issuing checks to ghost vendors, then withdrawing the cash under a false name, I said. All of it under the guise of HOA operations. There was a pause on the line before she answered. That's enough for a federal indictment. The following Monday, federal agents executed a search warrant on Margelyn's home. They found boxes of HOA documents hidden in her attic, several locked filing cabinets, and according to the official report, a laptop with encrypted files detailing financial transfers to out-of-state accounts. But what shocked everyone was what they found in the basement. Behind a false wall, agents uncovered nearly 40 years of personal records. Letters, deed copies, forged lien notices, even surveillance photos of dozens of residents. It wasn't just financial fraud, it was targeted coercion. She had compiled dossiers on anyone who had ever challenged her authority. When the news broke, the neighborhood was stunned. Not because they didn't expect she'd done something wrong, but because no one had imagined how deep it all went. The photos, the notes, the tracking of license plates, even recordings of private conversations taken from bugged community meetings. It became clear she hadn't just run the HOA, she'd been running a full-blown operation of control and manipulation. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed charges within the week: wire fraud, tax evasion, identity theft, unlawful surveillance, and aggravated harassment. The grand jury returned a full indictment. Bail was denied this time. We thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks after the indictment, I received a nondescript envelope at my door, no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a single typed sentence: "You need to see this before the next meeting." I ran a full scan on the drive before opening it. No malware, just one video file. The footage was grainy, dated, and time-stamped 3 years prior. It showed Margelyn in the old community hall, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize. "Once you get the liens in place," she was saying, "they'll have to pay or walk. Either way, we'll grab the properties." One of the men asked something off camera. She nodded. "We write the notices ourselves. If we send them certified, it's legally binding unless challenged. They never challenge." The rest of the video was a crash course in fraudulent lien practices. They'd been targeting elderly homeowners and people behind on dues, fabricating violations, issuing fake citations, and recording liens that had no legal basis, then offering relief by buying the properties through a third party. I forwarded the file to Lee and Gerald. Within days, the charges were expanded again, this time to include conspiracy to commit real estate fraud and elder abuse. The fallout was immediate. The families of at least 6 former residents came forward, describing how their relatives had been pushed out of their homes through threats and paperwork they'd never fully understood. One man broke down during a public hearing, describing how his mother had spent the last year of her life in a rented apartment after losing her house over a $600 fence height violation. The committee voted unanimously to begin a restitution fund. The court appointed a special master to oversee the dismantling of the old HOA structure and the review of every citation, lien, and fine issued over the past 5 years. The City Council passed new legislation prohibiting any HOA from operating without quarterly public audits and mandatory external review of all enforcement actions. At the final meeting before the special master took over, Gerald stood and addressed the room. "This place wasn't broken," he said. "It was hijacked, and thanks to the people in this room, it's back in the hands of the community." I didn't say much. I didn't have to. The rows of chairs were filled with neighbors, not out of fear, not because they were forced, but because they wanted to be there. Because they finally had a voice again. As I walked home, I passed a for sale sign being taken down in front of the Ripley's house. They were staying, after all. So were a dozen other families who had once planned to leave. Oak Crest wasn't perfect, but it was finally honest. Margelyn's trial was scheduled for the fall. Her defense tried claiming mental instability brought on by prolonged stress and hormonal imbalance. The judge didn't buy it, neither did the jury. She was convicted on all counts, but the real victory didn't come from the courtroom. It came from the front porches, the freshly painted fences, the unlocked mailbox doors. It came from knowing that no one in Oak Crest would ever again have to look over their shoulder just to plant a rose bush or hang a wind chime. It came from knowing we took it back. One motion sensor. One document. One neighbor at a time. The first full month under the interim oversight committee felt like trying to fix a collapsed bridge while still standing on it. Every drawer we opened, every file we reviewed, we found more rot. But it wasn't just about Margelyn anymore. People were finally ready to clean out the whole system. On a rainy Thursday morning, a contractor named Elias Harper stopped by the community hall with a stack of old work orders in a plastic bin. He'd done legitimate landscaping and minor repair jobs for Oak Crest years ago, but hadn't heard from the HOA since Margelyn took over. "She stopped using local guys," he said, shaking water off his jacket. "Told me the board was streamlining vendors." He handed me a sealed envelope from the bottom of the bin. "This was mailed to me by mistake a year ago. I figured it was junk, but after everything that's come out." Inside was a copy of a quitclaim deed. It transferred ownership of a small parcel at the edge of the neighborhood, technically community property, into the name of an entity called Crescent Pines Holdings. The signature, not Margelyn's this time. It was a name we hadn't seen before, Judith Ellery. Gerald scanned the deed, his brow furrowed. "That's one of the shell companies we flagged last week. Same P.O. box, different alias." We pulled the original property records from city archives. The land had been designated for a public-use parklet just under a quarter-acre, mostly green space and a walking path. But the Crescent Pines deed had reclassified it as private commercial use. There was a fresh concrete foundation poured on it now. We all knew what that meant. "Someone's building on stolen land," I said. That Friday, we drove to the county registrar's office. Lee had already submitted a fraud complaint. The clerk confirmed that Crescent Pines Holdings had filed zoning adjustment paperwork 3 months earlier, approved, rubber-stamped, and fast-tracked under the old HOA's letterhead. But even more disturbing, the zoning application had been co-signed by a notary named David Voss. A quick records check revealed he was Margelyn's nephew. I called Lee from the parking lot. "She used a forged deed, falsified a public land transfer, and had it notarized by a family member," I said. "That's property theft," Lee replied. "And if she leveraged her position in the HOA to push it through, that's abuse of official capacity. I'll coordinate with the Property Crimes Division. Don't confront whoever's building on it." Too late. When we returned to Oak Crest, a construction crew was actively pouring footings. I approached the site foreman, introduced myself, and asked for the permit. He hesitated, then handed me a laminated copy pulled from his glove box. "Who hired you for this job?" I asked. "Miss Ellery," he said. "She said she was developing a community center." I took a photo of the permit. "This isn't a legal build. The land was never hers to sell," he frowned. "You'll have to take that up with the client." "We already have," I said. "She's in federal custody." He blinked, then looked over at his crew. "All right, boys. Shut it down." The site was cordoned off by the city within 24 hours. The foundation was jackhammered back out of the soil a week later. The land was returned to its original designation, but that one forged deed opened a new door. Lee's office subpoenaed all property transfers initiated or notarized by anyone tied to the Oak Crest HOA in the past 5 years. What they found was a network of land grabs, small slivers of green space, easements, and undeveloped lots quietly transferred to shell companies, then resold to developers. The grand total? 9 illegal land conversions, over $200,000 in estimated resale value. And every one of them had a forged signature or a conflict of interest. The U.S. Attorney's Office expanded the charges. Margelyn was now facing counts of conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, official misconduct, and unlawful transfer of public property. Her nephew was indicted separately. And then came the most damning piece of evidence. During a forensic review of the encrypted files on Margelyn's laptop, investigators uncovered a folder labeled contingency. Inside were audio recordings, dozens of them. Some were private phone calls. Others were conversations captured in the community hall without participants' knowledge. One recording caught our attention immediately. It featured a conversation between Margelyn and a developer from out of state. She was negotiating the sale of a large parcel adjacent to the neighborhood land that belonged to a group of elderly homeowners who'd been pressured into signing power of attorney agreements. The deal would have displaced them. "I've got them on the hook," she said in the recording. "They don't understand what they're signing. I just need the board's fake approval, then it's done. The residents in question, 3 widows and a retired teacher, were still living there, unaware they'd almost lost their homes. The DA's office moved swiftly, voiding the fraudulent agreements and issuing a restraining order to block any future sale. We brought the group into the community hall the next week. One of them, Mrs. Kimball, clutched my hand the whole time. "No one's ever stood up for us like this," she said. By spring, the special master had completed the audit. Nearly every fine issued in the past 3 years was declared unenforceable. Families who'd paid under threat of lien were issued refunds from the restitution fund, now bolstered by seized assets. The HOA, as it had existed, was officially dissolved. In its place, Oak Crest formed a voluntary neighborhood council, purely advisory, no enforcement power, and fully transparent. Every expenditure, every meeting, every decision was public record. I didn't want to chair it. I'd had enough battles. But Gerald stepped in, and the community elected a diverse panel of residents, including Elias, Sandra, and even Marcus, the night shift worker who'd first uncovered the shell payments. As for Margelyn, she was convicted on 31 counts across local, state, and federal charges. The judge ordered a lengthy sentence, citing a sustained campaign of coercion, fraud, and abuse of power. She didn't speak at sentencing. Her lawyer claimed she was unwell. The court didn't care. The day after the verdict, the community gathered at the site where the fake community center had almost been built. The green space was now marked with a small wooden sign that read, "Oak Crest Park preserved by the people." Kids chased each other under the trees. Neighbors shared lemonade and stories, and somewhere in the middle of it, Mrs. Kimball stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "This feels right," she said. "Like it's ours again," I nodded, "because it is."